transform our habitual patterns. For those of you who are new to our panels, welcome. We'd love to hear your questions and comments, so please feel free to pop them into the Q&A box, and we'll be sure to answer them throughout the conversation. For those of you joining us on YouTube Live, hello. If you'd like to ask questions, please also download the app, and there you'll be able to ask your questions. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Pallavi. We're so excited to have you here as part of the Meditation Live community. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in psychology and expertise in mindfulness, and just an introduction to yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you, Shivani, for having me. I'm really excited to be doing the panel. So a little bit about me. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have been practicing, I should have calculated this beforehand, but somewhere in the 15 to 20 year range since graduate school, and that's counting graduate school. And my background is in cognitive behavior therapy. So if you saw my bio, you'll notice that. And much of what I'll talk about today really does come from a cognitive behavioral perspective. And what I've found in my training and experience is that the work I do from a cognitive behavioral perspective dovetails very neatly with what we know and what we've learned from mindfulness. And so I also have a background in mindfulness meditation. I've been teaching for about 10 years. And I started practicing mindfulness meditation myself a little bit before that. It happened at about the same time. I came to mindfulness because I was interested in it from a clinical perspective, and then discovered very quickly that it's hard to really teach mindfulness unless you have your own practice and you have a very personal sense of it. So those two things happened at about the same time. And so I'm a certified teacher of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is a group-based treatment that combines mindfulness principles and meditation with principles of CBT. And it was initially developed to treat depression, particularly for people who've had multiple episodes of major depression, but has now been adapted for various mental health concerns. And part of my work now, so I do about half my time is clinical work, and about half I do research where I work with colleagues, and our primary interest is in adapting MBCT to make it deliverable over the telephone and via methods other than in person, because that's just going to make it more accessible to people. And we're adapting it for a variety of different issues, for depression and anxiety, but also managing stress, managing pain, managing chronic pain, and also managing the stress that comes with chronic health conditions. So that's a little bit of an introduction to what I do and what my background is.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, I'm really looking forward to chatting with you today and hearing your thoughts and clinical expertise around this topic.
Great.
So when I think about habits, I feel like they can be thought of as our routine behavioral patterns. And whether we're aware of it or not, we're constantly forming habits. And oftentimes we may find ourselves just falling into a routine. But where do these habits actually begin? How do we form these initial habitual patterns?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. A habit is really nothing other than a behavior that has become automatic via repetition. So any behavior, any action that we take and engage in over and over again becomes habit. The very first time we do it, it may or may not have been conscious in the sense of being very deliberate and very aware. But at some point it becomes something that's automatic. It may still be conscious in the sense of, I know I'm making my bed. I kind of know I'm making my bed when I make it, but I also may not be entirely present and aware of it. So where does it come from? I mean, one of the things that for me as a psychologist that I think is really important to know is a little bit about how the brain works. And one of the reasons why we form habits is because it makes life a whole lot easier if we're not having to think about every single action that we take in a day. And so this is a little bit wired into us, into our brains. This is a fantastic capacity that we have to essentially streamline how we do things, how we get through our day, how we get through our lives. So really, how we form habits is rooted in this sense of, it cuts down on decision fatigue. So we don't have to be making decisions about every single thing every single day. Some things are just taken care of because they become automatic and habits.
Got it. That makes sense. So it's kind of a combination of sort of conscious and subconscious behavior, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say.
Yeah. And then rather than falling into unconscious habitual patterns that don't serve us, how could we become more present and empowered with our habits?
Well, I think the key to that, what I would say, was really embedded in what you said already, which is being present, meaning being aware. And that's not, as I'm sure a lot of the people that use the service in your app have seen or are starting to see, awareness is really a practice and not something that we switch into at some point and then just stay there. So really, this is where mindfulness is so helpful when we think about habits, either breaking unhelpful habits or unhealthy habits, or with forming new desirable habits, is that having the ability and the practice, making a commitment to bring awareness to our actions in a moment by moment manner is really what's going to help power our ability to make the changes we want to make. And I can get a whole lot more specific about that, but just I like to start with this idea that so much of this rests in awareness. Without deliberate awareness, not a whole lot's going to change.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one of our attendees mentioned in a comment here, they said, sounds like mindfulness is a continuous choice, or sounds like being mindful is a continuous choice.
Yeah, that's a really kind of nice way to put it. That I don't know, certainly I can say from my own personal experience, it's hard to stay mindful. Let me just put it that way. We continually realize that we've fallen into automaticity, we've fallen into habits, so to speak, and that could be around any number of things. And in that moment of becoming aware, because we've practiced it in our meditative space, we then have the ability to choose and say, well, let me now bring awareness to everything that's going on for me in this moment, everything external, but also everything internal, what's happening in my mind. So it is an ongoing behavior in and of itself.
Yeah. And one of our students just asked, how long should a beginner expect it to take to learn how to be aware or mindful?
That's, I think, $1 million question. And what I would say is it could be just a few moments a day. The MBCT, the program that I am certified to teach, we teach people to do 40-minute meditations daily, and that's a lot. But a lot of our adaptations and some of the research suggests that, you don't need to do that much of a deliberate formal practice in order to start to see the rewards in daily life that you could do. And I'll tell you, I typically ask people to do 5 to 10 minutes, but really a minute a day, if you can commit to a minute a day of practicing deliberate mindfulness, you'll start to see your ability to practice mindfulness more automatically build up over the course of your days. So I don't think certainly to start out, I would say if you can do a minute, you're on the right track.
Yeah, and I've heard from people too. I mean, like to your point, even if you can just do a minute, it's almost like going to the gym and just exercising. It's like you just do a little bit and you get better and better. And it's like training a muscle of focus. So 1 minute turns into 5 minutes, turns into 10 minutes, 30 minutes, etc.
And that's really the essence. We're not talking about this quite yet, but we might as well go there. Building a new habit. We often think, I've fallen into this myself a lot over the years, that if I have an end goal in mind, right? Let's say I want to, this is something that I've tried to do multiple times in my life. I want to be a runner. I want to develop a running habit. And so in my mind, I have this idea of what that looks like. That looks like running for a half hour, 5 times a week or 4 times a week. But if I try to start there, that's really going to get me into trouble because my body's not prepared for that. My mind's not prepared for that. And really what's going to help me get to a place where I can really feel like, yep, I'm a runner, I run, this is something I do, is to start with a few minutes a day. It's to strap on my running shoes, to get outside, maybe just walk around the block. Things that for a lot of people I know, because I work with a lot of people around this, doesn't seem very satisfying when you're comparing it to your end goal. And yet that's where habits begin, with these really small changes.
Yeah, and one of our attendees just commented and said, "Am I to believe that this is a lifestyle? Maybe he's saying like a lifestyle choice here, maybe in comparison to like weightlifting, for example. So almost like what I was saying about going to the gym. It's like you're creating it's a lifestyle choice that you're making when you're being mindful and practicing mindfulness."
Oh, yes, absolutely. If we're talking about mindfulness, it is absolutely a lifestyle change. And I'd say I'm trying to think of an analogy that would work here, and I'm not sure that I'll get one, but it's sort of, the idea is, it's like learning a language or maybe a bicycle. The idea is that once you learn how to do it, it's really hard to forget. And the same is true with mindfulness. Once you start to realize, right, so with mindfulness, what it brings us is the ability to know, to be aware that we can observe what's happening for us. We don't just have to experience it. We're not just immersed in it. We can also develop the ability to see the thoughts we're having, to observe the feelings, whether the emotional component, the physiological component. And once we have had a taste for that, it really is something that continues. I mean, I don't think it's exactly like learning a language, or maybe it is, because I've tried to learn a language and if I don't practice, I lose a lot of it. But I don't lose everything. I retain certain basic principles. And yet when I come back to it, I can pick up and move forward a good bit more quickly.
Right. And Julie had a question here. She said, "Is there a type of meditation that works better than others?"
I think I'd say that depends on what you're after, right? So there are lots of different types of meditation. If we're talking about habits, like what's going to help with building habits, I would say mindfulness meditation is your best bet. Now, I'm a little biased. This is what I am trained in. This is what I know. I know about other types of meditation, but I don't know them that well. But if we think about what mindfulness gives us, which is the ability to observe, to pay attention, to know what's happening for us, to know when we are responding, to know when we are experiencing craving, and how we then act or react to it, then mindfulness is really what's going to help you with understanding how those pieces come into play with habits, good habits, bad habits.
Right. And I guess speaking of mindfulness, since that was your choice for meditation practices, I think this would be a great opportunity for us to do maybe a quick 5-minute practice on bringing
Sure.
some conscious awareness to the topic of transforming our habits.
Yes. Okay. All right. So you go ahead and get into a comfortable position, feet generally flat on the floor, hands wherever feels most comfortable. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable for you, or you can drop the gaze. And we'll start with bringing awareness to the breath. So noticing the sensations that accompany the inhalation. And then noticing the sensations that accompany the exhalation. Really bringing a close attention, a sense of curiosity to the movements of the chest, of the abdomen, wherever you notice the breath the most clearly. And now what I'm going to have you do is bring we'll go with a habit that you might be trying to break. And this could be anything from walking in the door at the end of the day and going straight to the fridge, or maybe it's checking your phone when you're in the middle of a task. Or maybe it's interrupting other people when they're speaking, whatever habit. There's so many different types that you might be interested in trying to break. So bring whatever that is, whatever it is for you, to mind. You might want to imagine a situation in which this particular habit comes up. And then first, what might be useful to do is to notice whether the experience of engaging in this habit has, what kind of a feeling tone it has. Is there a pleasant feeling to it? Is there an unpleasant? Are there shades of both present? And this can be really quite subtle. If nothing stands out in a strong way, that's okay. And then you might ask yourself, what thoughts are coming to my mind right now as I contemplate this particular behavior that I engage in? What images? What might be present that fuels that sense of desire or craving to engage in this particular habit? And then bringing awareness to sensations in the body that may accompany that sense of craving. As you notice the desire to pick up your phone or to open the fridge, where does this craving reside in the body for you? You may notice a tingling in the fingertips or the shoulders, maybe even in the feet, you never know. And taking a moment to rest with these sensations, not trying to get rid of them, not trying to overpower them. We're simply resting with them. And then before we wrap up the practice, just for a moment, drawing attention back to the breath. And then when you're ready, open the eyes. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
One of the things I noticed when I was doing that practice is sometimes I find that when I think about, the habit that I'm trying to transform,
Mm-hmm.
I felt a little bit uncomfortable in some ways, like taking the time to really look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And even when you're guiding and saying, how does it make you feel and these different things, it's like sometimes I don't really sit with a habit like that. I just kind of do it. And I'm like, oh, I don't like that I do that, but I'm not really sitting with it and thinking about, well, why am I doing this? And how does this make me feel? And so that was a really interesting practice for me.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm really, really so grateful that you mentioned that and you brought that up, because I think this is really critical, especially when we're talking about a habit that we're trying to break. Our go-to is often to try to use willpower, or to try to just sort of tell ourselves we should, this doesn't make sense, why do we do this, why can't we just get over this and make the changes we want to make. And the reality is that if there's a habit that you're struggling to break, there's a lot associated with the habit. Again, if we think about habits as things that have developed as a shortcut or developed by watching other people, parents, friends, etc., there it usually, or not always, but it can be loaded with some emotional significance. And what we know about ourselves, every single one of us, every human on the planet, when we experience something unpleasant, we try to move away from it. Unfortunately, when we try to move away from our internal experiences, our emotions, our feelings about something, we're not able to see it clearly. And if we can't see it clearly, then that's really going to be challenging to modify the behavior that comes from or is associated with those feelings. So again, the answer is not to sort of overpower it, not to force yourself to look at it, but is to see if you are able to develop an attitude of curiosity. This is what, when we meditate, when we're on the cushion, whatever it is you're focusing on, whether it's the breath or sounds or something you're looking at, part of what we're developing is an attitude of curiosity. And that's going to help us then with our habits to bring that same lens to examining what's coming up, what might be getting in the way of us making the changes we desire. And it's not going to happen overnight because, again, we're not wired to say, that's tough. I really want to get, mired and in this and think about what's going on here. Our reaction is to move away, is to push away a little. So it's an iterative practice, and it tends to build, and it takes a little bit of time and, of course, a lot of intention.
Yes, I love that. I like this idea of bringing curiosity to it because I feel like something with curiosity feels more comforting when I have to look at something. It feels a little less threatening.
Yeah, it helps sort of cut or get around the layers of judgment that might come with something.
Yeah, I love that. One of our attendees here said, what kind of meditation for 40 minutes? And I think they may be trying to say what kind of meditation maybe to practice for 40 minutes?
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I mentioned that in the context of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is it's really a treatment program for depression and anxiety. And in that original program, what we focus on, we do a variety of meditations. Actually, they're all mindfulness based, but we do breath focus, we do body scans, we do movement meditations, stretching, gentle yoga-like postures. We do sound meditation. So there are lots of different foci for attention in those practices, but they are all really the philosophy, the principle is a mindfulness practice.
Got it. Okay. And just a reminder to all of the attendees, I invite everyone to continue to send in your questions and comments. We love to hear from everyone. So thank you for doing that. And Dr. Pallavi, you talked a little bit about this in the beginning of our conversation. And my question is in regards to starting a new habit and, where to begin, but also sometimes I feel like, it's easy to start habits that are fun, but what about the ones that are challenging or, kind of goes back to breaking those habits of the things that aren't so fun? I mean, how do we incentivize ourselves to stick with it? And, if we find ourselves sort of falling off the bandwagon, how do we kind of pick ourselves up and get back on track?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I tell you, I could spend, an entire panel talking about just that piece. But here's what I'll say. What we know works really well as an incentive is social approval or social reward. So this is the reason why a lot of exercise programs and other habit change programs tend to be group-based and tend to help provide extrinsic motivation or external motivation by connecting people with others who have the same desires, who are on the same path, no matter what it is, the target behavior is. So if there is a way to link up with somebody else who's wanting to do something similar, or if you have a family member or a friend that's willing to help provide you with encouragement in some way, I think that can be a really great incentive. And beyond the social component, one thing, and this is the part I think we could, really dive deeply into maybe for another day. When we think about habits, we often talk about there are four components to the sort of habit cycle. The first is cue, which is there's something in the environment or potentially a thought or a memory, something like that, that serves as a stimulus for, and this is now part two, is a craving or an urge of some kind. So I gave an example earlier of walking in the door and going straight to the fridge. So in this situation, the cue might be entering my home after a hard day's work and seeing the kitchen or seeing the fridge. And then the craving that comes up, the urge, it could be a thought, it could be an image, it could be some kind of a physical sensation. That's the craving. Often we act on the craving. We engage in the behavior that has become habit via repetition. And then the last stage in this 4-step process of habit development is reward. Often the behavior we engage in, there is a reward involved. And so now if you can think about your good habits and your unhelpful habits in terms of these 4 components, what you want to think about is how you might be able to intervene in each of those 4 areas to make change. So if what I'm trying to do is, let's say I wanted to do some stretching. I want to do a little bit of yoga every morning when I wake up to loosen me up and get me ready or get me focused. I need to think about my cue, the stimulus. What's gonna remind me? What's gonna get me there? If it is that so that's the stimulus, that's the cue portion. I want to also think about my reward. A lot of times, especially adults that I work with will tell me, I'm an adult, I want to do this, I should just be able to do it. I shouldn't have to give myself stickers, right? That's for kids. But the reality is that for all of us as adults, we need rewards when we're developing new behaviors because we're busy. We've got lots of things to think about and we have to incentivize, like you said. So those are just 2 ideas for how to and where to intervene when you're thinking about habit change.
Got it. Thank you so much. And I think we have time for just one more question here that came in from Bevan. And she said, do you think the 30 days to create a habit idea is true?
I'll say again, it depends. The short answer is we don't know. The research is not great on this. And here's why. It's really hard to do research to identify how long it takes to develop a habit, because every habit's really different. If we're talking about flossing every morning, that's going to be pretty different from running for 45 minutes 4 times a week. Just what's involved with that is really so different. It's hard to design a study that can test how long it takes. Also, goes without saying, every person's a little bit different. Having said that, I think that, having a 30-day or a 60-day plan is an excellent idea, because what you're doing is committing to the process, which ultimately, if you think about it, a habit's going to develop this is very simplistic, but really I think bears repeating. It's going to develop by repeated effort. And so if a 30-day plan gets you engaged, thinking about something, rewarding yourself, experiencing a sense of accomplishment, that's fantastic. And then I would say at the end of the 30-day, expect to re-up on your 30-day plan. Because once again, a habit stops being a habit when you stop doing it. And so really we're thinking about, if you're wanting to develop a habit, you really want to think in the mindset of, this is something I'm doing for the rest of my life. And so a 30-day plan is just the beginning. It's just the start. And you just want to prepare yourself to have your next plan in place beyond that.
That's great. I love thinking about it like that, because I think sometimes we do hear often about like a 21-day plan or a 30-day plan, but it really is, a habit stops being a habit as soon as you stop doing it. And I love the way you said that. It's so simple, but that's so true. And it really just comes down to the repetition. So thank you. That was such a great answer.
Sure.
So it's about time to wrap up our panel now. And before we close out today's session, it would be great if you could lead us in a short intention setting meditation, perhaps
Sure.
for transforming habits.
Yeah, okay. So we'll do this with eyes closed and really very quickly coming into a comfortable posture. And I'll have you and myself, we'll all think about just whatever habit it is that's on your mind that you would like to either break or make, and what that might look like. And here's the question I would ask you to ask yourself. And before I ask the question, you don't have to have the answer right now. This answer doesn't have to be present and fleshed out. It's more of a guiding question that I hope will sit with you as you sort of move through the rest of your day. And the question is, what would be the most important change that would come about in your life as a result of breaking or making this habit? So, what would be the most important thing that would come about in your life as a result of making or breaking the habit you are paying attention to? Letting that sit, just like you would drop a stone into a pond and it would slowly sink to the bottom and there would be ripples left over, allowing those ripples to be present, and just see over the course of the day what comes to you. You can open your eyes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pallavi, and thank you everyone for joining us for today's panel. We hope to see you all again soon in one of our other classes. Namaste.
Bye, everyone.